On the island of Newfoundland, upon the southwest coast, lies the little town of Virgil, to whom I'll sing this toast. There are so many highlands that lie just off her shore, and when the cold north wind blows, you can hear the billows roar. The people from the village make their living from the sea. They like their independence, it shows that they are free. Some fish in their small boats in the wind, the rain and sleet, while others make their living on the offshore trawler fleet. They've known their share of tragedies down through the years, and when the memories overcome, they show their grief with tears. For they have lost some loved ones to the furies of the seas, for heartaches and heartbreaks are locked in memories. This village, it's got beauty carved on its rugged shore. 7 miles of pure white sand, who could ask for more? The mountains and the valleys where the rivers run so fast, and the salmon rise to the sportsman's fly as he makes another cast. Tell the people of this village love their native home, for anyone who goes away most surely will return. Just like that lifelong mystery, the answer you won't know. What makes this rugged village burn so deeply in your soul? What makes this rugged village burn so deeply in your soul?
Good evening, and welcome to This Week in Review. Tonight in our stories we have an eagle sighting, bookworm camp ends, Jimmy Flynn, MP Judy Foote. Please stay tuned for these stories after this.
When you wish for something wonderful to happen.
Sometimes it can make you forget
About the needles and the pain.
and get through this thing.
Forget about being stuck inside.
Laugh with my family?
Go somewhere really amazing and get through this thing.
The Children's Wish Foundation of Canada. Imagine the difference a wish can make.
Last week, an eagle was sighted on Beau and Sarah Seymour's bridge. It appears the bird had landed on a mop that was there to dry out its wings. It was a wet, foggy day. As I was trying to get closer, it flew away. It was sighted again there on another day, but flew away before I got there. On Thursday, August the 6th, was the summer bookworm closing. Throughout the summer, they were quite busy doing things such as craft, reading books. Ticker Tom came to visit. They wrote to Robert Much and received a letter back with their names and a story. They made different foods to go along with the different themes. For example, they made totems for Camp Scalawag, as well as they made a rocket ship which they really enjoyed. They brought in their pits for paws and claws. There were 24 students who registered, and there were usually 5 in the morning and 10 in the afternoon. Brittany McDowell, Alicia Ann, and Gabrielle Pink were hired for 8 weeks. To conclude the camp, they had a pizza party with cake and cupcakes. While surfing the internet, I came across an insert from MSN Travel about Sandbanks Park. This is what it said. Best beaches in Canada, Reader's Choice. Sandbanks Provincial Park, Burgeo, Newfoundland. No, that's not a mistake. Readers tells us that Newfoundland is not to be overlooked when it comes to the best beaches in Canada, particularly those in Burgeo. Like the park it shares its name with in Ontario, Sandbanks Provincial Park also gets its names from the sandy stretches and dunes that lines its shores. Inland, you'll find a park of spruce fir forests and rocky barrens, typical of the Newfoundland landscape, as well as places to camp, play, and hike. Comedian entertainer Jimmy Flynn was in town, and I had a chance to have a few words with him.
We've been talking about Jackson ever since the Florida went out. I'm going to Jackson, let loose in my coat. Yeah, I'm going to Jackson.
Goodbye's all she wrote. Well, go on down to Jackson. Go ahead and wreck your health. Go play the hand, you big talk and make a big fool of yourself. Yeah, go to Jackson. You better comb your hair. It's gonna snowball Jackson.
Into that city, people gonna stoop and bow.
Really?
I'm gonna teach them women, teach them what they don't know now. I'm going to Jackson, yeah, that's a fact. I'm gonna snowball Jackson, ain't never coming back.
And the life that you in Jackson, I'll be dancing on a pony cake. Gonna meet you around town like a scolded hound with your tail tucked between your legs. Yeah, go to Jackson, you big talking man. I'll be waiting in Jackson behind my J-Pan van.
Well, we got married in a fever, hotter than the pepper sprouts. We've been talking about Jackson ever since the fire went out. I'm going to Jackson.
I'm coming with you this
We're
time.
gonna have some fun.
Oh, you bet.
Yeah, we're going to Jackson. Look out, Jackson Town.
I'm here tonight with Jimmy Flynn. This is a beautiful night to buy it.
Nice to be in Burgeo. I'm living on Southern Ireland, now about born in Marystown. We left here when I was 7, I believe, and I'll never forget leaving Newfoundland when I was a little boy. I said to my father, "How long in the mainland?" He said, "Shut up and keep swimming."
Do you travel Newfoundland much?
Not a whole lot. I do more hunting and fishing down here than I do here.
Okay.
We come down and we're doing, I think we're doing 7 shows. My wife's mother was sick. I booked the show in Port of Bass, and then we did corner from last night, we're here tonight, we're over there tomorrow night, we're going to Lewisport, down in Marystown, back to the mainland, back to Ontario.
What made you leave this show business?
Well, when I was born, my parents both saw me, and they burst out laughing. So I was always a class clown, I guess. Playing guitar and singing. An old lady said one time at a party, she said, "You're awful late. Why don't you go make a living with this?" Right? Anyway, I never thought of doing it. I went, I played like Vancouver, and they hired me out there for a year. And then the ferry boat hired me, the government playing the ferry boat from Vancouver Island. So then I joined a group called Finnegan. We spent 10 years together, and then Peter got sick, and I went home in 1986. 13 years.
Yeah,
up trying to survive, so it's nice to, when they come to my show, they laugh and sing, they forget their problems. Oh yes, I've been over to Germany, I've been over to Norway, England, Scotland, down the States, Bermuda, Jamaica. I do a lot of corporate conventions and travel a lot to
Anything you would say is worth admiring?
Yes, it's a beautiful place, Joe. It's my first time down here, and I'm going to look around the more and more about the being more friendly. It's a beautiful part of the world. I'll be spreading the word all across the country how nice it is here.
Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Our MP, the Honorable Judy Foote, came by the studio for a chat. I'm here tonight with our MP, the Honorable Judy Foote. Good evening.
Oh, good evening.
And what brings you to this part of the province today?
Well, I'm here because I'm getting the ferry to go over to Ramia for the come home year. And it's very much looking forward to that. And I've been, I guess this is my 4th time in Burgeo since getting elected just over 10 months ago. So I was here for the Sand and Sea Festival. I was here for the high school graduation. I was here for a couple of meetings. And of course, every time I get the ferry, either to go to Ramia or to Grey River, I pass through Burgeo, and I always stop when I do so. So we're on our way to Ramia, and we're really looking forward to it.
Oh, that's great. So what's new? Anything new on the go these days?
Well, you know, this summer has been a really hectic summer, and even though there are lots of issues still on the go, and we make sure that my offices in Grand Bank and Stephenville are still there to take all the calls from our constituents, and there are issues that range everywhere from, of course, what's been going on in the fishery. We've had a devastating fishery this year in some respects, and you know what's going on with Marine Atlantic. There are always issues with respect to employment insurance and the issue that we've had there with the, just people not getting responses to their claims soon enough, and I guess, I don't know, if you read my my householder that came out recently, I had a person in Harbour Breton who called to say he had to wait 70 days, to get any response to his EI claim, and that's just not acceptable. These people are obviously without income, and as I said to the minister responsible in Ottawa, what do you tell your constituents when they ask you why they're not getting their EI in time in order to be able to provide medication for their families, or put food on the table, or make sure that their children are taken care of? It's just totally unacceptable. So there are all of these issues that are still going on throughout the summer, and they will always go on, of course, and we have to try and find a way of making sure that they're handled better than they have been in the past. But for me, it's been a wonderful summer. I've been traveling throughout the riding. And you've probably heard me say time and time again that I have probably the best riding in the country, but it's also the largest riding in the country in terms of the number of communities. I have 180 communities. And this summer I've been to every part of my riding that I can possibly get to. I think the only thing that I regret is that I can't get into 180 communities in 2 months. And that's regrettable, because obviously some people then have to be disappointed. So the position we've taken is that this year we'll respond to as many invitations as we possibly can, and my husband and I go together to as many as we possibly can. To some of those that I can't get to, of course, the people who work for me in my offices will go and represent me, but people say that's not the same, although they like to see them. So next year what we'll have to do is look at those that we have not been able to get to this summer and make sure we get to them next summer. But it's been so exciting, and people are so welcoming and so warm, and they just make you feel so at home, and of course I keep telling everybody, when I have people who ask me about the riding, and I keep saying, well, I have 180 communities, and from one point to the other it takes me 10 hours if I drive from the tip of the Burin Peninsula right over to Rose Blanche, and I have 8 isolated communities, and they look at me and they just shake their head, and I said, well, how long does it take to get through your riding, And I remember our leader, Michael Ignatieff, saying to me, well, Judy, whenever I've tried to reach you, you're in some isolated community or you're somewhere where I can't reach you. And I said, well, Michael, how long does it take you to get throughout your riding? He says, 20 minutes. I said, well, God love your heart, But I wouldn't trade the riding of Random Burin St. George's for anything. And I tell all of them that.
Oh, that's good. So anything new on the marine conservation area? Last time you were there, you mentioned that.
Well, that comes up all the time. And interestingly enough, when I took a look at this file after I got elected, having been asked to do so, I wasn't that familiar with it at the time, but I've since, I think, gotten to know the file inside out. But what was really amazing when my office and I worked on this was that with calls that we made to Ottawa in terms of trying to find out why it's taking so long, or if it was ever going to happen, or, you know, like give us an answer one way or the other, because there's nothing worse than just hanging there, not knowing if anything is going to happen. I think people feel much better if they know one way or the other. And when we called and started talking with the bureaucrats in Ottawa, you know, some didn't know what we were talking about, some had never heard of it. And then when we said to some of them, well, you know, this has been on the go for 8 years, then they kind of sit back and say, 8 years? Like, that's way too long. At least you should have been told one way or the other. And I said, well, that's why we're calling. We want to know why we're not being told, if there's something else we need to do, if there's some other, you know, process we need to follow, applications that need to be filled out. Tell us what needs to be done. So I've written to the minister responsible, the Minister of Environment, Jim Prentice, to say, you know, like, we've been talking with bureaucrats, you know, ever since I got elected, which was 10 months ago, and now I'd like to hear from you where we are in this process. And well, the other thing that we were told, which was interesting when we talked to the bureaucrats in Ottawa, was that the province has to be on side, and that they had no indication that the province would approve of this designation for this area, and which was interesting, because we know people that I talked to in this area were of the understanding that, of course, the province was fully on side and understood what needed to be done. So I'm thinking, like, there seems to be some misunderstanding and some confusion here. So of course, I talked to my good friend and colleague Kelvin Parsons, who's the MHA for the area, and Kelvin now is taking it up with the province. So between the two of us in our offices, what we're trying to do is trying to find some resolution and get this, you know, decided on one way or the other. Because it's 8 years is a long time, and then you have one hand saying, you know, well, we really don't know what's gone on here. Then the other one saying, well, you know, is the province on side? You have to have the province and the federal government on side. So what we're trying to do is bring it all together, and hopefully that'll happen in not too, you know, not too long from now. But again, when you're working with trying to get an area designated, it just seems that, you know, even though you've done all the legwork, you know, everything that needs to be done to get it to where it should be by now, especially after 8 years, that somehow there's always a wrinkle, you know. And our job, of course, is to iron out those wrinkles, which we're trying to do.
Okay, so once the area do become a marine conservation area, what does that entail? Like, what does that mean for us?
Well, what I'm told is, and when because one of the questions, of course, that was being raised with me by those who weren't quite sure what it meant, because you can also have, there's a marine protected area, and there's always an issue of concern there from fishers who might think they're not allowed to fish, and so that became an issue, of course. So I think what was done by those who've been promoting this, the marine conservation area, was try to assure people that this will not infringe on their rights. You know, this is a way of protecting our marine area. We've got so many species off our shores, and of course, when we look at our beaches and look at the, you know, the sand that we have in our park here, the Sandbanks Park, it's just absolutely wonderful. And I have to tell you, I think it's the best kept secret, your park. Has to be the best kept secret. I mean, the number of times I've been in Burgeo, even when I was a provincial minister of education and came down and turned the sod for the school here, I had not had the opportunity to go to the park. But when I went for the festival this year, when Howard and I went, and you know, of course we took part in all the activities, and someone said, have you been out to the beach? And I said, well, no, we hadn't. And I said, Howard, let's walk out. Well, it just blew my mind. It just took my breath away. The absolute beauty, the sand, it has to be as good as any beach I've ever been on. And, you know, it's breathtaking. And the sand was so fine. You know, you'd think you were going to go, and we're so used to pebbly beaches and rocky beaches, and you think you're going to be walking on gritty sand, but it's actually so fine. It was amazing. And just to see the young people just frolicking in the waves and having a wonderful time. I looked at Howard and I said, you know, what we've missed over the years by not knowing about this. And now, of course, and we could only be here at that time for a day and a half because we had to be somewhere else. And it's crazy. I mean, the schedule we've had this summer is crazy, but it's been good. It's been good. And what's so good about it is that really people really appreciate it when put the time into coming out
Yes.
and spending time with them. You
Yes,
know.
very much so.
And we have, and there's so many come home years. You know, we'll leave today now. Well, we'll go to Ramia. Then we'll come back, and we have to drive to Deer Lake, of course, and we have to then catch a flight to St. John's, and then go back to the Burin Peninsula. And then next weekend we go to Hermitage for the Hermitage Rum Festival. Then I go get the ferry to Galtas and meet with the council there. And then I get the ferry back to Hermitage and get the ferry to McCallum and overnight there. Then I come back and go to Franceway for their come home year. So it's and of course they had their come home year in Grey River, or their jamboree. They didn't have a come home year. They had their jamboree in Grey River, and I was just in Port aux Basques. You know, they had the opening of the gateway for the trailway for Canada.
Okay.
And again, there's so many things happening, not just in my riding, and of course, again, you know, the riding around in Burin St. George's is so large, but throughout the province. And it's good. It's a good time to be involved in political life. And of course, well, I've always been involved in political life. But you know, even with what's happening on the national scene now, and people keep saying to me, when are you going to bring the government down? You know, when are you going to decide that we've had Harper long enough? And I keep saying, well, you know, elections are expensive. Elections are really expensive, and I don't know that the Canadian people want us to go to an election just to see Harper put back in again. So we have to be sure that everything is right in terms of, you know, making sure that we can form the government, that the Liberals can form the government, which of course is what we want to do, because we believe we have a platform that is better for the Canadian public than what the Conservatives have. And of course, when you talk Conservatives, you're not talking progressive Conservatives. And I think people make that distinction there, because, you know, the way that Prime Minister Harper runs the country isn't the way that previous progressive Conservatives ran the country. So I can understand why even progressive Conservatives are saying it's time that we got rid of Stephen Harper as our Prime Minister.
Okay, very good. So back a few minutes ago, you mentioned the Santa Sea. Did you enjoy your time there with
Oh, very much so. And you know, congratulations to the organizers. And I say this everywhere I go, because volunteers make all of these things happen. You know, and sometimes we forget that. We get there and we really enjoy everything that's planned for us. We enjoy the music, we enjoy all the games, we enjoy the sing-alongs and just sitting around and relaxing. And we forget that it takes volunteers to make it all happen. And if there's any paid staff, it's just some students are being paid, you know, to help out over the summer. But these things don't just happen by chance. And of course you have volunteers that are involved in every community doing everything. But during the summertime, you know, when you have your come home years, when you have your festivals, you have your jamborees, it really is volunteers who could be doing so many other things with their own families during the time, that they make an effort and pull these things together for us. But yeah, it was just so much fun, and just being able to walk along the beach and the weather. The weather, and I used to say when I was in provincial politics that if the weather was bad, that it was provincial, or that it was federal. I always say when I was in provincial politics that weather was a federal responsibility. Of course, now when we get really good weather, I take credit for it. But no, it was wonderful, and so many people turned out, you know.
Yes, a big crowd.
Yeah, and everywhere I go, of course, I'm always bragging about my riding, and everywhere I went, I talked about the Santa Sea Festival in Burgeo, and people have said, you know, I've always planned to go. And I said, well, then I can vouch for it. You really do need to go. And as I said, I think it's the best kept secret. And I do know that it's marketed, but you know, it's a fair drive down here from off the Trans-Canada Highway, but it's well worth it. It's well worth it. And this morning driving down, we saw 2 caribou. Yeah, we saw 2 caribou. And in front of us were cars from Nova Scotia and Ontario, I guess on their way to Ramia. And I said to my husband, what a treat for them to see that, you know. And of course, fortunately, it was in the light of day, and they weren't too close, so you didn't have to worry about any danger to the people who were driving. But yeah, it was a good time. It was a good time. And you know, it's people need to be able to relax. You know, they really need to be able to enjoy the festivals and the come home years and be able to let their hair down, and people who work so hard all year round. And that's why when I talk about people who are now finding it very hard to access their employment insurance, you know, that is just simply not fair, you know. And I keep reminding the government every time I speak about this is that the money that's in the employment insurance pot is not government money. It's money that's there because people worked hard and made a contribution to employment insurance. So it's actually their money. So why make it so difficult for them to get what's rightfully theirs? And you know, when we saw everything happening across the country with all the plant closures, and we saw the automobile industry shutting their doors and so many people out of work, what we found really interesting, those of us who are from Newfoundland and Labrador, of course, because we're used to, you know, having some difficult times, particularly in our fishing industry, yes, you know, and people having to go on EI, or people losing jobs for whatever reason, you know. It's become a way of life for us. Mm-hmm. Not that it's something that we want, but that's the nature of the seasonal industries that happen in our province. But it's interesting now to sit with your colleagues from other parts of the country, like people from Ontario, you know, mm-hmm, people from Manitoba, people from Quebec, you mm-hmm, know, and all of a sudden, of course, they're being impacted. Automobile industry is closing down, you know, plants that are closing down, and people out of work by the thousands. Mm-hmm. And now they're looking at us and they're saying, now we understand. Now we understand how hard it is when people get laid off and need to access that employment insurance fund. And now that they're having difficulty doing it, and we remind them that, well, now you know what our people go through. You know, whenever they put in a claim and for some reason, you know, they file their claim and it's not acted on immediately, that means that someone is hurting, you know, and our colleagues in Ontario understand that now. And what I find really frustrating, and this is something I brought up too in Ottawa, was that, you know, I've said to the minister in question period, like when we have someone who files a claim and they don't get responded to within 21 days, which is when they're supposed to get their, you know, get responded to, and you know, they've got the 2-week waiting period, mm-hmm, and then it'll usually take 21 days after that before they'll get their first check. But people don't understand that, you know. When you say they got a 2-week waiting period, people think, well, okay, so after that 2 weeks they get their check. Mm-hmm. I say, no, it's a 2-week waiting period before their claim even cuts in. You know, so they're looking at you and they just don't understand the system. And I keep saying we need to do away with that waiting period, you know, because that is where are people supposed to get their money? It's not like they have a lot of savings, you know, so what are they supposed to do? You lose your job on a Friday, what are you supposed to do on that Monday? You know, if you don't have a lot of savings, you still have to put bread on the table. Your children still need clothes to wear. You still have that mortgage payment or your car payment or your insurance payment. Like, that doesn't stop because your job stops.
Exactly.
And I said to the minister at one point when she got up and said, you know, we have a very lucrative EI system. And I said, what world are you living in? Talk to people who are on employment insurance. People who are used to a particular standard of living because they've been working so hard to make sure they earn good money. Now all of a sudden, you know, they've lost their job or the job is finished for the season. They don't make the same money on EI that they made when they were employed. So how can you say we have a lucrative EI system? And the other thing is, if you're not responding quickly to them, then they have to wait so long. And she said, well, you know, sometimes they don't fill out the forms right. I said, so because you get a form filled, maybe they don't have their birth date in on it, or maybe they didn't, you know, fill out their address or something, or didn't complete the address. Instead of having someone picking up the phone and calling that person and saying, oh, look, you left this out, they put the form back in the mail to them. So now you've got however long it takes for it to get from wherever it has to go to be registered and get back to that person. That's another week or 2 weeks. Yes. And when they could pick up the phone, and I said, why don't you hire enough people? You now know that we have thousands more people who are going to be needing EI employment as a result of the recession. Why don't you hire enough people to be able to respond, to be able to pick up the phone and call and say, we want to get this done as soon as possible. You know, you left out your postal code, you know, or you forgot to put in your birth date. Instead of sending it back in the mail and saying, you know, we're returning this form for this reason, A, B, C. You know, and so she'll say, well, we did hire more people. And I have to keep reminding them, it's not your money. It's not your money because, you know, every person that runs that EI system, that's paid for out of the EI fund. That's not government money. That's not like hiring fisheries officers, which are paid for out of the government pot of money, that's through the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. The EI, everything to do with EIs actually comes out of the EI pot of money that's paid into by those of us who work and pay our contribution towards EI. Money to which we're entitled if we ever find ourselves unemployed. And nobody wants to be unemployed. And this is what we keep saying to the government, to the Conservative government, like, where's your social conscience? Do you think people want to be unemployed? Most people want to work. You're going to find a scatter person who say, oh, I had enough of this, But those people are so few, to suggest that anyone wants to be on EI for any length of time is foolhardy, and it's really sad when you get the kind of attitude that you get out of your federal government that says, first and foremost, we've got a lucrative EI system, or secondly, we're moving as fast as we can, without listening. I mean, we're making very positive suggestions to them about how to improve the service, and they're not listening. Even now, I mean, our leader, Michael Ignatieff, one of the things that he put on the table was that we really need to be able to respond quickly when people need EI. And we don't need people waiting 2 weeks, and we really need to. And the other thing, why don't we look at increasing the benefits? Benefits haven't been increased for quite some time, so why don't we look at increasing the benefits? But what we're finding now is, even though the Prime Minister agreed to put this committee together, made up of people from the opposition parties and the government, that what I'm being told is that when this committee gets together, the Conservatives are not the least bit interested in trying to find solutions to the issue of EI. Just not interested. They're just, playing with us, and which is a shame, because we thought over the summer that if we had the committee in place and our people who were on that committee and the other parties who had people on the committee, that they worked together over the summer, and when the House opened in the fall, because we'll be opening now in the middle of September, we thought when the House opened in the fall, we'd have a solution to the issue around EI, something that we could bring forward, debate in the House of Commons, and that everybody would agree to, because of course it would have been a compromise made of all the parties involved, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen. And so when people say, will there be an election in the fall? I say to them, I really don't know. I'm told Canadians don't want an election. On the other hand, we're told that Canadians don't want to keep Stephen Harper there any longer than we have to. And so it's a difficult call. It's a difficult call. You have to, the one thing I think we have to know if we go to an election is that when the election is over, Stephen Harper won't be the Prime Minister.
Okay, very good. So speaking of the recession, have you found a big increase in unemployment now?
Oh yes, throughout the country, because of course you had so many places closing down, and Ontario never ever saw the job losses to the degree that they're seeing them now, and hasn't been as severe in our province because we've done very well in our province. So we haven't seen so much happen here. And the other thing, of course, that we've done in our province too is people tend to go away and work for a while. Yes. So people who would, be without a job, they just take up root and go, and they'll go to Alberta, or they'll go to PEI and work in the plant there, or they'll go to New Brunswick and, work at potatoes, or in PEI and work at potatoes. And so our people have had a tendency to go where the work is.
Yes.
And that's we want to work. We want to work. And as I said before, for anyone to suggest that people don't want to work, all you have to do is look at Newfoundlanders and Labradorians and look at where we are all over the country.
Yes,
Look at Fort McMurray, and I know when people come back for a vacation, I talk to people at your festival, the Sand and Sea Festival, and people who are living away, home for the festival, home for vacation, and it's always home. They may have lived in Fort McMurray for 30 years, but home is Newfoundland and Labrador.
Yes.
So to tell you, I was just out, and just to that point, I was just out in Port-au-Port East because they had their festival out there, you know. And then I went up to Black Duck Brook, and they had their festival up there. I was up there last night, actually. And but you talk to people, like there was a lady there who's been living away for 35 years. She's still in Maryland. She's worked in Washington, D.C. And she said, you know, I'm coming home to live. And I said, home? So Port East is your home? Oh, yes, she said. I've lived away for 35 years. In 2 years, I'll be retiring here. And I said, you know, you're no different than all the other Newfoundlanders and Labradorians I've ever met in my life, who, it doesn't matter how long you've lived somewhere else, Newfoundland and Labrador will always be home. Yes. And home will always be that community that you grew up in. Yes. And her sister was standing there with her. And her sister said, sure, I retired here 4 years ago after living in Ontario for 30 years. And I said, well, where are your children? She said, I have 7 children. They live in Ontario, and I have 12 grandchildren, and they're in Ontario. I said, but you came back to retire in Port East. Yes, she said, and I'd do it all over again. You know, the sound of the ocean, you know, the sound of the seagulls, just, it's the wind. And she was telling me, I love wind, I love windstorms. And I can relate to all that, you know, because even though, I mean, this is my home, it will always be my home, like it's always be their home. And I spend now, of course, from the middle of September to the middle of June in Ottawa. And I'm so busy when I'm in Ottawa because I live 15 minutes from Parliament Hill. So I walk to work every morning. It takes me about 15 minutes. So I'm there by 7 o'clock in the morning. And I usually don't get home at night until about 11 at night, and I walk back home. But your day is so full that when you do get a chance to stop, the first thing you think about is ocean, you know, and the fresh air. You know, so it's just, this has to be God's country. I swear this is God's country. And so I can understand why people who, you know, who move away and are gone away for years want to be back. We were, part of the opening of the festival in Port East was they had a mass at the cemetery as they start. And of course everybody starts their festivals differently, you know, based on their own traditions. But here we were in the cemetery, and the priest was standing there beside one of the crosses, and he said, let's just for a minute, he said, have a minute of silence. And the sun was shining. It was like 6:30 in the evening, and it was so quiet, and you could hear the sound of the ocean, the waves splashing, and the seagulls soaring overhead, and if you closed your eyes, it was so peaceful, so peaceful. And where else can you find that? But in Newfoundland and Labrador,
exactly.
You know, it's yeah. So there's so much going on here, and I find too, and I give the government you know, credit for this, because they have an excellent ad campaign going on, you know, tourism campaign, and so many tourist cars that we've passed, and we've been everywhere this summer, everywhere, from every region of my riding, you know, that I can possibly get into. We've been in every region. And so many tourists from Ontario. Yeah, they're just car after car after car. They're here from Ontario. Yeah.
People coming to visit, people coming home.
Yeah, and people. I think people coming to visit too. You know, is a lot of it because of the promotion that we're doing. You know, I mean, you see an ad, you know, that has a clothesline by the ocean with clothes blowing in the wind. You know, and I'm going, wouldn't that attract you? You know, like just the freedom that suggests the blowing in the wind. You know, yeah, it's good, and you can tell I've had such a good summer. It's been a busy summer, and people say to me, how do you do it? Like, you're on the road all the time, you know, and we're up at the crack of dawn because we have to be in a certain place by a certain time. We're going all night because you're celebrating with people, and but you just get rejuvenated by it all. You know, I don't find it tiring, I find it refreshing, and it is because you get to spend time with so many Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. I mean, a lot of people that I knew before, because being in provincial politics, of course, for 11 years, you know, I spent a lot of time going throughout Newfoundland and Labrador. But now in a different capacity, you know, I'm spending even more time with more people because I'm representing more people. And I'm so appreciative that I have that honor to do that, you know. The only thing that I'm finding really hard is that I'm trying to do as a member of Parliament what I did as a as an MHA. You know, as an MHA for the District of Grand Bank, I was very hands-on. You know, I had to be everywhere doing everything. And now I'm trying to do the same thing, but I have 180 communities. You know, when I was an MHA in a district, I had 17 communities. So 180 is a lot different than 17. And my husband keeps saying, Judy, everybody will understand if you can't be in 2 places one time, right? I said, I know, but you know, it's people, you know, people deserve to have you turn up at their events if they want you there. You know, if you get an invitation, and they're so appreciative. You know, so I know I can't be everywhere. You know, I know it's just virtually impossible. I had on one Saturday I had breakfast on the wharf in Grand Bank. I had come home here in St. Lawrence at 1 o'clock. Oh no, they had the parade. I had breakfast on the wharf in Grand Bank at 8:30. I had to be in St. Lawrence for the opening of the parade for the come home here at 10. They had the opening at 12. And then I had to be in Buren for the opening of their come home year at 3 o'clock. Then I had to be back in Grand Bank for the closing of their come home year. So like all in one day. And but that was, I mean, I could do that because they were close enough together that you could do it. What becomes hard is when you have, like, I wasn't able to be in Port aux Basques for Astrolabe days this time but I was there the day before for the opening of the trail, you know, for the gateway for the trailways. So Brian Button, who's the mayor of Port aux Basques, very, very graciously, you know, and he said, I will bring greetings from you and explain to people that you were here yesterday. You know, I said, well, I appreciate that, you know. But yeah, so there's so much to see and do. And you know, and you're right, everybody's right, you really don't have to leave Newfoundland to have a good holiday. No. You really don't. And of course, I've known that for a long time. But the more I go around and the more I see, and just looking at what Burgeo has with that, you know, with your provincial park out there, you really don't have to leave home to have a good time. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for dropping by with your busy schedule.
Oh, listen, you know, I just value this station so much because it's a way to reach so many people. Because even though you go to an event, you're never going to get to see everybody, you know, and people are going to be away, or you're just going to, as you're going around shaking hands or saying hi to people, you're going to miss somebody. And the service that BBS provides is just phenomenal, you know, and I'm so thankful that it's here because it gives me a chance to say hello time and time again to the people who I represent and who elected me, and who's given me this honor to be the Member of Parliament for Random Buren St. George's. And thank you for always being there and being so good at what you do.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And you're welcome.
Thank you.
This concludes our program for tonight. Thank you for watching. Good night.